The officer had his hand on his holster before I even made it to the corner of Maple and Fifth. My daughter was asleep in the stroller, her small fist curled around a stuffed rabbit, and I was holding a half-empty cup of coffee when he stepped into my path and said the words that would cost him everything he thought he had. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stop right there and explain what you're doing in this neighborhood." In 41 years of life, I had learned that there are moments that define you, not by who you are when things are easy, but by who you become when someone tries to make you small. I became something else entirely that morning, but I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Elijah Warren. I'm a family court judge in Crestfield County, and I have been for the last 6 years. Before that, I spent a decade as a public defender, fighting for people who had no one else fighting for them, and then sitting behind the bench deciding the futures of children and families. I have seen the worst that human beings do to each other, and I have tried, every single day, to hold a line between what the law says and what justice actually looks like. I thought I understood the gap between those two things. That Saturday morning in October, I learned I had barely scratched the surface. It was the kind of morning that arrives in the Midwest like a gift, cool and still, light coming in low and golden through the elm trees on our street. My wife, Denise, had been fighting a migraine since Thursday, so I'd gotten up with our daughter, Maya, at 6:30. Maya was 2 years and 4 months old. With her mother's stubbornness and my habit of waking up entirely decided about what the day was going to look like. That morning, she had decided it was going to involve the park on Elm, the one with the duck pond and the creaky wooden bridge she liked to stomp across. She communicated this by locating her shoes, bringing them to me one at a time, and placing them in my lap with the seriousness of someone filing a motion with the court. We lived in Sycamore Hills. Wide lots, mature trees, houses built in the 40s that people had been renovating and passing down ever since. Denise and I had bought our place 7 years earlier. Wraparound porch, original black and white kitchen tile, a backyard oak tree that had been dropping acorns onto that yard long before either of us was born. We were the third black family on our block. I mention this not to make a point, but because it is a fact I was always, quietly, aware of. The way you are aware of something you carry without ever quite acknowledging that you carry it. I had Maya in the dark blue Thule stroller, a bag with a juice box and a yogurt tube, and my coffee. Gray sweatpants, a Crestfield Law hoodie, old running shoes. I had not shaved. I looked exactly like a man taking his toddler to the park on a Saturday morning, which is exactly what I was. The elms were just starting to turn, and Maya was sitting up pointing at everything. Squirrel, bicycle, a bag caught in a branch, with the proprietary delight of a child who has recently discovered that the world is full of remarkable things requiring someone to be told about them. I was 2 blocks from home when I saw the patrol car parked at the corner of Maple and Fifth, engine running, exhaust faint in the cool air. I registered it the way I had learned to register such things. Cataloged it, noted the 3rd district number, assessed the figure in the driver's seat, and continued without changing my pace. Changing your pace is how you signal something is wrong. Nothing was wrong. I was a man on a public sidewalk with his daughter. I heard the car door open. "Hey, sir, stop right there." The voice was sharp, compressed with the authority of someone who expects the first syllable to function as a wall. I stopped. I stood with both hands on the stroller handle and turned around slowly. Every movement deliberate and legible, nothing sudden, nothing that could be described later as threatening. He was maybe 27. White, close-cropped hair, the solid rectangular build of someone who had been lifting weights since high school. Name tag, Officer T. Briggs. His right hand rested on the top of his holster, not gripping it, just resting, thumb hooked against the leather strap, with the practiced ease of someone who wants you to know the option exists without being able to say he threatened you with it. "Morning," I said. "What are you doing out here?" Flat, assessing, not openly hostile, but evaluative in a way that had its own particular ugliness. He was sorting me into a category in real time, and I could see him doing it. "Taking my daughter to the park," I said. He looked at the stroller. He looked at Maya, who had turned around and was studying Officer Briggs with the frank, unguarded curiosity of a 2-year-old who has not yet learned that certain attentions deserve caution. She held her rabbit against her chest. Her yellow jacket, the one with the embroidered ducks, had dried yogurt on the left sleeve. She blinked at him with her mother's enormous dark eyes. "This your neighborhood?" he said. Something moved in my chest, small and precise, like a key turning in a lock I had not realized was locked. I looked at him for a moment before I answered. "Yes," I said. "This is my neighborhood." "You got ID?" I set my coffee on the low stone garden wall to my right. I reached into my hoodie pocket slowly, both movements visible, unhurried, and took out my wallet. I removed my license and held it out. He took it. He held it for longer than a driver's license requires. Not long enough to be confrontational, but long enough to be a statement. He looked at the license, looked at my face, looked at the license again. "Elijah Warren," he said, as if reading aloud to a recorder that wasn't there. "That's correct," I said. "What's your business on this street, Mr. Warren?" The cold had settled into my hands. I was aware of Maya behind me, of the stroller shifting as she moved, of the absolute stillness of the street. No neighbors out yet, no cars, just the patrol cars low idle and a single crow somewhere in the elms. "I live on this street, officer," I said. 20 years of courtrooms had given me some command over my voice, even when other things were not under control at all. 1414 Sycamore Drive, 2 blocks east. I'm taking my daughter to the duck pond at Elm Park. I've walked this route on Saturday mornings for 6 years. He handed back my license without a word. He scanned the block, then looked back at my face. "We've had some reports in this area," he said. "Break-ins, car windows." "I understand," I said. "You understand," he repeated. The inflection was subtle but unmistakable, a sideways acknowledgement that we both knew what was actually being communicated. He wasn't talking about car windows. I looked at him steadily. "Behind me," Maya said. "Dada," in a small, uncertain voice. Something tightened in my throat that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with the fact that she was 2 years old. She could feel the electrical current in the air between us, and she was calling for me from 12 inches away. "Is there anything else, Officer Briggs?" I said. He held my gaze for 3 more seconds. Then, "Have a good morning," and he walked back to his car. I stood on the sidewalk until the patrol car pulled forward, signaled, and turned right. I counted to 10. I picked up my coffee. I looked at Maya. She was frowning in the direction the car had gone with an expression so adult and concentrated that on another morning it would have made me laugh out loud. "Duck?" she said. "Yeah, baby," I said. "Ducks." But I was already turning the encounter over the way I turn over something in court, looking for the seam, the place where the surface story differs from the structure underneath. He had been parked at that corner. He had come out specifically when I passed. He had asked whether this was my neighborhood before he asked for my ID. That sequence had an architecture. Sequences always do. I told Denise when we got home, standing at the kitchen island while she held a cold cloth to her forehead and Maya redistributed her plastic animal collection across the living room floor with the focused efficiency of a very small urban planner. Denise went still. She has the stillness that surgeons develop. Not frozen, but concentrated. All extraneous movement stopped so that thinking can run without interference. She lowered the cloth and looked at me. "His name was Briggs," she said. It was not quite a question. "Officer T. Briggs, 3rd District. The car was already at the corner when I came by." I paused. Maya was there for the whole thing. Denise looked toward the living room, where Maya was issuing instructions to a giraffe about some procedural matter involving a plastic house. When Denise looked back at me, her expression had shifted to something harder. "What do you want to do?" she said. "I don't know yet. Monday I'll pull the 3rd District roster. Something about this doesn't sit right, and I need to understand what it is before I move." She looked at me for a moment. "Or it was exactly what it looked like," she said quietly. "A black man with a stroller in a white neighborhood. We sat with that. The refrigerator hummed. Maya declared in the living room that the giraffe was going to the airport. Maybe, I said, but I want to be sure. On Monday, I arrived at the courthouse at 7:55, as I always did. Sandra handed me my coffee, black, 1 sugar, and my docket, and said, "Morning, Judge Warren," in her level, steadying way, and I was grateful for the normalcy of it. I moved through the morning's hearings, custody modification, child welfare review, 2 protective orders, while that open screen in the back of my mind kept running. At 11:15 during recess, I asked Sandra to pull the active personnel roster for Crestfield PD's 3rd District. She did not ask why. Sandra never asks why. 20 minutes later, she put a single printed page on my desk. I found the name in 11 seconds. Officer Tyler Briggs, age 27, 3rd District Patrol. Hired 4 years prior. 1 prior complaint resolved administratively. Nature, conduct. I circled the name. Then I turned to the active case files on the left side of my desk and went to the B section. Briggs versus Holt. I sat very still. The radiator ticked. In the hallway, 2 clerks debated lunch. I opened the file. Kyle Briggs, 31. Disputed custody of a 6-year-old named Emma, grinding through my court for 8 months. He sought full physical custody and termination of his ex-wife, Renata Holt's parental rights, citing instability and a mental health hospitalization from 4 years ago, one that his attorney, Glenn Pratt, had failed to substantiate with anything beyond Kyle's own affidavit. Pratt was methodical and procedurally relentless. 3 continuance requests, 2 evidence challenges, and 1 motion to recuse me on grounds of alleged bias, which I had denied because the grounds were entirely without merit. In the family relations summary at the back of the file, under parties, family, and social connections, was 1 line I had not previously had reason to notice. Respondent Kyle Briggs has 1 sibling, Tyler Briggs, currently employed by the Crestfield Police Department. My hand went flat on the desk. I am not a person who frightens easily, but in that moment, with the October light in my window and the Briggs versus Holt file open in front of me, I felt a slow, complete, cellular recognition move through me. Not just of what had happened Saturday morning, but of what it had been intended to accomplish. Someone had sent that officer to my corner, had sent him knowing who I was and where I would be. The timing with the neighborhood app post, the anonymous call to the non-emergency line, the precision of it made my stomach go cold in a way that heat never could. I thought about Kyle Briggs, whose hearing was in 4 days. I thought about his attorney's failed recusal motion. I thought about what it means when someone, having failed to remove a judge through official channels, reaches for a different lever, a smaller, more personal one. One that walks on 2 legs and wears a badge and stands on a sidewalk next to a man's 2-year-old daughter and rests its hand on its holster. I closed the file. I picked up my phone and called David Chen, my oldest friend from law school, now a senior partner at Holloway, and Chen specializing in civil rights and professional misconduct. "I need to talk to you," I said when he answered. "Not as a friend. Officially." A brief, careful pause. "How bad?" David said. "I'm still mapping it," I said. "But I think someone just tried to intimidate a sitting judge in front of his 2-year-old daughter." The silence on David's end had a quality to it. Not surprise, but the concentrated sharpening of someone who understands that a situation has become genuinely serious. "My office. 5:30. Don't talk to anyone at the courthouse before then." "Understood." I hung up. I sat at my desk with the closed file in front of me and the elm trees burning copper and amber outside my window. Thursday's hearing was 4 days away. Kyle Briggs and Glenn Pratt would walk into my courtroom and stand before my bench, and they did not yet know what kind of man would be sitting behind it. They thought they had delivered a message. They thought it had landed. They had made a fundamental error in reading their audience, and that error was going to cost them considerably more than they had planned to spend. That was the last quiet thought I had for a long time. David Chen's office was on the 14th floor of the Holloway and Chen building on Commercial Street, with a view of the river and the kind of quiet that expensive real estate buys in a city where noise is the default. He was waiting at the conference table when his assistant showed me in at 5:32, yellow legal pad, 2 cups of coffee already there, which told me he had cleared everything else from his afternoon. We shook hands the way we always did in a professional context, even though we had known each other for 18 years and had once eaten an entire pizza on the floor of our law school library at 2 in the morning during finals. Some habits are about signaling to yourself as much as to anyone else. "Tell me everything," he said. "From the beginning. Nothing edited." I told him. All of it. The neighborhood outpost, the timing, the patrol car, Officer Briggs in his hand on the holster strap, the license held too long, the words about break-ins and car windows, then the file, then the connection. By the time I finished, David had not written a single thing on his legal pad. He was looking at the table. Glenn Pratt filed the recusal motion when? He said. 6 weeks ago? I denied it 3 weeks ago. And the custody hearing is Thursday, 10 o'clock. David was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Eli, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it as your attorney, and not as your friend. Tell me. This is not the first time. He said it carefully, watching my face. 18 months ago, a family court judge in Ridgefield County, Judge Patricia Osei, recused herself from a custody case 3 days before a hearing. The case involved a father with an extensive support network in local law enforcement. The recusal was listed as voluntary. She never gave a public reason. He paused. Tyler Briggs worked for the Ridgefield County Sheriff's Department until 4 years ago. When I pulled his transfer date, it was 11 days after Osei's recusal. The room was very quiet. The river was doing something silver and indifferent in the window behind David's head. He moved departments, I said. He moved departments, David said, which means this is not a one-time improvisation. This is a method. Someone, Kyle or Pratt or both, has used this before, and it worked. And now, they're using it again. With you. And they expected it to work again. My coffee was cooling in front of me. I wrapped both hands around the cup and felt the ceramic, warm and smooth, something solid in a moment that felt like standing on ice. What do they expect to happen? I said. I think, David said, they expect you to call Pratt this week and quietly recuse yourself. Cite personal reasons, scheduling, a potential conflict, something that can't be questioned. The case gets reassigned. A new judge. No 8 months of context. Kyle Briggs gets another run at those parental rights. And Tyler Briggs keeps his badge. And nobody connects the dots. Because the dots were designed not to be connected. David turned his legal pad over and picked up his pen. Except you connected them. What are we looking at? Obstruction of justice, intimidation of a judicial officer, official misconduct, potentially conspiracy, depending on how much Pratt knew. He wrote something down. I need everything. Screenshots of the app post with timestamps, the non-emergency call log, your full written account of Saturday morning. I'm going to contact Patricia Osei tonight, and I'm going to contact the Judicial Conduct Board. And the Thursday hearing? David looked at me steadily. You sit on that bench on Thursday, he said, and you do your job. Exactly the way you always do your job. I drove home in the dark. The streets of Sycamore Hills were quiet, the elms just shapes against the sky. I sat in the car in the driveway for a moment before going inside, hands on the wheel, engine ticking as it cooled. And I breathed in and thought about Patricia Osei and her voluntary recusal and her silence. I thought about Emma Briggs, who was 6 years old and had been caught in the middle of her parents' war for 8 months. And I thought about Maya, asleep upstairs with her stuffed rabbit, who had sat in her stroller on a Saturday morning and watched a man rest his hand on a gun near her father. I went inside. I kissed Denise, who was reading on the couch with a cup of tea and the particular watchful expression she wears when she is waiting for news she already knows is serious. How bad? She said. Worse than I thought, I said. But I know what it is now. And I know what to do. She looked at me for a long moment, then she nodded, once, and handed me her tea. The next 3 days were the kind of quiet that is not peaceful, but tactical. I submitted my written account to David. I reviewed the Briggs versus Holt file with the attention I give to every case. Not more, not less. And I prepared for Thursday the way I prepare for every hearing. I slept 6 hours each night, not because I was calm, but because I had learned, somewhere in my 40s, that exhaustion is not the same as preparation, and that the people who had sent a patrol car to my corner were counting on me to be shaken. I intended to disappoint them. Wednesday night, after Denise and Maya were asleep, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee going cold on the table. The house was quiet around me in the particular way houses are quiet at midnight. The refrigerator's low hum, the sound of the wind in the oak in the backyard, the occasional creak of the floor settling. I thought about the first time I'd put on a judge's robe, the specific weight of it across my shoulders, what it had meant to me, standing in that changing room before my first day on the bench, that a man in this country could be born into what I had been born into and end up here. I thought about the cases that had moved through my courtroom over 6 years. Parents desperate to keep their children, families breaking apart, and families trying to hold together. I thought about what the robe means and what it requires. And I thought about a thumb resting against a leather holster strap, and a 2-year-old girl in a yellow jacket with embroidered ducks frowning at the direction a threat had just gone. I poured out the cold coffee. I went to bed. I was ready. Thursday morning. The courtroom on the second floor of the Crestfield Family Court building had 12 rows of wooden spectator seats, most of which were empty on a regular day. That morning they were not empty. David Chen was in the back row with a woman I didn't recognize until I placed her. Patricia Osei, whom I had never met in person but whose face I knew from her judicial biography. She was in her 50s, composed, wearing a dark coat. She gave me a brief nod when I entered. 2 people from the Judicial Conduct Board, a man and a woman, both in gray suits, were seated near the door. Sandra, at her clerk's station, met my eyes briefly and looked back at her desk. Glenn Pratt entered at 9:52 with Kyle Briggs beside him. Pratt was compact and neat as always, briefcase precise on the table, expression professionally neutral. Kyle Briggs was 31 and had his brother's rectangular build, though softer, and he wore a dark blue suit that had been recently pressed. He did not look at me when he sat. Renata Holt came in separately with her attorney, Simone Adeyemi, young, tenacious, thorough throughout this case. Renata sat very straight in her chair with her hands folded on the table in front of her, and she looked at me with an expression that contained, under the wariness, something that was almost hope. I took my seat. Sandra called the case. "Before we begin," I said, "I want the record to reflect several things." Pratt looked up from his papers. "Over the past 72 hours," I said, "I have filed a formal report with the Crestfield Judicial Conduct Board and the State Attorney's Office documenting what I have reason to believe was a deliberate attempt to intimidate a sitting judge in connection with this case. The report includes a time-stamped record of a public social media post, the Crestfield PD's non-emergency call log from the morning of October 4th, a formal account of an encounter with Officer Tyler Briggs of the 3rd District on that morning, and information regarding a substantially similar incident involving another family court judge in Ridgefield County 18 months ago. The room was very still. Kyle Briggs had gone the color of old wax. Pratt's pen had stopped moving. "I want to be clear," I said. "None of this affects my ability to rule on this case fairly and in accordance with the evidence. My obligation to this court and to the child at the center of this proceeding does not change because someone attempted to remove me from this bench. What it does mean is that the attempt is now on the record, and the people who made it will answer for it through the appropriate channels." I paused. "Mr. Pratt, do you have any preliminary motions?" Pratt stood slowly. His voice, when it came, was careful and slightly smaller than usual. "Your Honor, we may need to request a brief continuance to consult with—" "On what grounds?" I said. A pause. Pratt's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a single whitening at the hinge. "In light of the statements you've just made, my client may wish to—" "Mr. Pratt," I said, "your client has sought a continuance in this case 3 times. Each time, a 6-year-old girl has waited. She has been waiting for 8 months. I'm going to need a legal ground for the continuance request, not a strategic one." Pratt looked at his client. Kyle Briggs leaned forward and whispered something. Whatever he said, Pratt listened with the expression of a man receiving news he already knew was bad. "We have no preliminary motions, Your Honor," Pratt said. "Then we'll proceed." What followed was 4.5 hours of testimony, evidence review, and argument. The evidence Pratt had been delaying and maneuvering around for 8 months did not, under sustained examination, hold the weight he had claimed it did. The mental health hospitalization he had cited as evidence of Renata Holt's instability was a single voluntary admission following a postpartum diagnosis, treated and resolved, no subsequent incidents. The unsafe living environment allegation rested on one affidavit from a neighbor who had described Renata as sometimes loud on the phone. The financial argument ran headlong into Renata's documented income, her consistent school participation record for Emma, and the testimony of Emma's school counselor, who had never observed any sign of instability in the child's home situation, and had, in fact, noted in her records that Emma's demeanor during supervised visits with her father had shown measurable anxiety over the past year. At 3:47 in the afternoon, I ruled. Physical custody would remain with Renata Holt. Kyle Briggs's visitation would continue under the existing court-supervised arrangement pending the outcome of the conduct investigation. His motion to terminate Renata's parental rights was denied, and I placed my reasons on the record in terms that were specific, detailed, and extremely difficult to appeal. I looked at Kyle Briggs when I finished. He was staring at the table, and his attorney had placed one hand on his arm with the practiced steadiness of someone preventing a man from doing something he would regret in a room full of witnesses. "Mr. Briggs," I said. He looked up. "Your daughter is 6 years old," I said, "and she will be watching how the adults in her life conduct themselves for a long time. I would encourage you to think about that." He looked at me for a moment. Then he looked away. There was nothing he could say to that in this room, and he knew it. I stood. Sandra called the court to order for adjournment. As I walked toward the door to my chambers, I heard from somewhere in the back of the room a single quiet exhale. I thought it was Patricia Osei, though I didn't turn to look. The consequences came in increments, as consequences tend to do. Tyler Briggs was placed on administrative leave 2 days after the hearing, pending an internal affairs investigation. The state attorney's office opened a preliminary inquiry into the non-emergency call and its connection to the case timeline within the week. Glenn Pratt received a formal letter from the State Bar's disciplinary board regarding conduct unbecoming an officer of the court. Kyle Briggs filed an appeal of my ruling. The appellate court denied it 4 months later. Tyler Briggs resigned from the Crestfield Police Department before the internal affairs investigation concluded. The state attorney's office, working in coordination with the Ridgefield County DA, eventually brought charges of official misconduct and witness intimidation. He accepted a plea. He did not serve time, but he did permanently lose his badge, and his name is in the public record in a way that will not leave it. His brother's custody case was resolved, finally, fully, in Renata's favor, with a revised visitation schedule that required Kyle to complete an anger management program before unsupervised contact could be reviewed. Patricia Osei called me in November. It was a Wednesday evening, and I was in the kitchen helping Maya with the complicated project of building a tower out of crackers, which kept falling over, and which Maya kept rebuilding with the equanimity of a person who has decided that the outcome is not the point. "I should have said something at the time," Osei said without preamble. "You didn't know it was a pattern," I said. "I suspected," she said, "and I was tired, and I told myself it wasn't worth the disruption." A pause. "I've submitted a full account to the conduct board, 18 months late, but it's there." "It matters," I said. "It's on the record now." "Because of you," she said. "Because you called," I said. We talked for another few minutes, and then we hung up, and Maya's cracker tower fell over for the 6th time, and she looked at it with philosophical equanimity and began stacking crackers again from the bottom. The last time I walked past the corner of Maple and 5th on a Saturday morning, it was the following April. Maya had just turned 3 and had strong opinions about which route we took to the park, and that morning's opinion was that we were going past the house with a big orange cat that sometimes sat in the front window. We went past the house. The cat was in fact there, and it received a lengthy and enthusiastic greeting before we continued on toward Elm. The elms were coming back into leaf, that particular pale green of April that looks almost luminous in morning light, and the air smelled of last night's rain and fresh earth and something sweet from a neighbor's yard. We passed the corner of Maple and 5th. The spot where the patrol car had parked was empty, just a corner like any other corner, warm in the April sun. I looked at it for a moment as we passed. Maya was pointing at a robin on the sidewalk ahead with the urgency of someone who required me to be fully aware of this robin immediately. "Bird, Dada, bird. I see it, baby. Big bird." "Pretty big," I said. She considered this for a moment, watching the robin with her mother's serious, assessing eyes. Then she looked up at me with something like satisfaction. "Our bird," she said. I looked at her. I looked at the corner behind us, empty in the morning light. I looked at the street ahead, the elms going green, the bird on the sidewalk, the duck pond waiting at the end of it. "Yeah," I said. "Our neighborhood." We walked on toward the park. The robin flew.